Hello there. Welcome to the Business of Story, or hopefully, welcome back. I'm Park Howell, and you know what? After 300 episodes bringing you global story artists to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell, and creating a show that is ranked among the top 10% of downloaded podcasts in the world, deep breath, I am not about to change. But maybe I should, and maybe you should too, according to today's guest.
What I always say is that you don't have a choice. Change is here and it will be more often and more disruptive than ever before. The only choice you have, will you be an active and willing and conscious participant in creating the change, or will you be its victim? That's all. The only choice is, are you creating your story or are you living somebody else's story?
Dr. Nadya Zhexembayeva, nicknamed the Reinvention Guru, is author of the new book, The Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook, How to Thrive in Chaos. Dr. Nadya is a scientist, entrepreneur, TEDx speaker, and resilience and reinvention expert, working with such brands including Coca-Cola, IBM, Cisco, L'Oreal, Danone, and many, many more to help them reinvent their products, their leadership practices, and business models to meet this new market demands that we are all up against, and to help them prepare for incoming disruptions. Today, we are going to explore with Dr. Nadya how business reinvention has changed. And if you're not reinventing every 3 years or less, you may well be out of business. How and why to use chaos as a resource, and how you can take advantage of the new Reinvention Academy for free. Are you ready to reinvent your story? Let's do it. Dr. Nadya, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure to be here, Park. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I love your new book out. So you are the mistress of chaos.
Apparently.
The woman that helps all of us get through chaos. And by golly, if we haven't been through chaos in the last 12 to 14 months, I don't know who has.
Absolutely. There's been an acceleration of disruption age. I can say in the last 15 years or so, I would put about 15 years that we went into this new age of high speed and uncertainty. But this last year really showed us the reality that is here to stay.
What interests me about your work is, in my world of business storytelling, stories are always about change. Mm-hmm. If you have no change, you really have no story. And at the cusp of that change is typically chaos. Yes. You've got a protagonist and you want to know who they are, what makes up he or she. And you don't really know that until they are flung into change. And you see how they react. And quite often they have to change internally if they're going to survive this. Do you find that same sort of thing in your work?
Absolutely. I think what's happening now is that we are reclaiming collectively our innate ability to deal with change proactively. If you look at the last couple of centuries, staying stable, predictable, stability as a whole has been put on a pedestal of this idea of what's good. So if you're a professional, you don't have chaos. If you are a professional, you don't make mistakes. If you're a professional, you don't go through trials and tests. That was a perception of what good looks like and what a professional looks like. Today, it's almost exact opposite. It's actually the other way around. If you're not making enough mistakes, something is wrong with you. If you are not facing chaos, you're not being courageous, ambitious, and audacious enough. If you are not facing trial and tribulations, you're probably not putting your goals high enough. And this is the new era in which we're in, and we're still trying to find our place in it, kind of trying to close us on.
Well, in your book, you talk about the old way of thinking that companies didn't really reinvent or change, and they could go over 2 or 3 decades of doing the exact same thing over and over. But today, and it's probably, I'm guessing, starting with technology, in the late 1990s, and what it has done for our knowledge and our ability to act on our own behalf with our own agency. We don't need some big company to make things happen, that it has accelerated that change. To you, talk about and share case studies of companies changing, reinventing themselves every 1.5 to 3 years. And if you don't think this way, that you have a good chance of getting rubbed out.
Yeah, that was the shocking reality for me. So I started in the field of organizational behavior, studying a large system survival. That's my specialty. I wanted to understand, how does a big system, a city, a country, a big company, what makes some companies survive and some get destroyed. And it was a shocking discovery that the average life cycle for the past couple of centuries was about 75 years on average for a typical company. Of course, it is an average across industries. Some industries a little bit longer, some industries a little bit shorter, but the average life cycle was 75 years. That meant that I could graduate from college, enter your company, work in my company whole life, retire from that company, die, and still not see that company go through one major transformation in our lives. But today, we did this study, we do it every 2 years. The last study we completed was September 2020. And the research shows that the average right now is 6 years, even for high investment, very heavy industries, mining, manufacturing. The cycles are no longer than 10. And of course, high tech, fast moving consumer goods, the cycles are actually closer to 1-2 years. So it's a dramatic change. And the rules of the game, how do you win in this new world, are significantly different from how do you win in those long cycle, slow pace stability world.
So you're saying that these companies are not lasting any longer than 2 to 8 to 10 years when you're saying that cycle?
No, it means that your business model cannot last. So you have to upgrade your business model, rethink your product portfolio, rethink your practices and processes, come up with new capabilities more often than you've ever had to do before. So this idea of sustainable competitive advantage, the only sustainable competitive advantage is reinvention today.
And reinvention is embracing chaos. And whether you want to reinvent or not, you have to be thinking that way. And I imagine there are degrees of reinvention too. But let's first hear a little bit about your backstory. You've got quite a compelling immigrant story. And I'm curious if there was a time when you were a young lady or even a little girl that you can look back at and say, this was a formidable moment in my life that informs who I am today and why I deal in so much chaos to help people get through it.
I think a lot of us are formed by stories and experiences and realities that happened to our parents and our grandparents even before we were born. And that was definitely the case in my story. I was born to a family of dissidents. I was born in the Soviet Union. And on all sides of my family, my ancestors, my great-grandparents, or my grandparents were arrested, tried, executed because they were not the best supporters of the Soviet system.
They were creating chaos.
They were creating chaos. And Kazakhstan, my country, my home country, was a place of a massive genocide. 40% of Kazakh population got killed between late 1920s and early 1930s by the government through artificially designed famine. And the second of things, because of our vast territory, we're 9th largest country in the world by territory with a tiny population because most of it got killed. We became a place where most of gulags, all of the concentration camps of Soviet Union, not all, but absolute majority were held in Kazakhstan. So you have this amazingly painful but very rich history in which you are born, where most people who were political prisoners, they would leave the camps and they would stay in Kazakhstan. And those are my friends or my parents of my friends or grandparents of my friends. And this is where you're born. And then when I was already a teenager and I started working already, the Soviet Union collapsed. And that was the formidable experience, because if you think of something as unmovable and unshakable, if you look at what turbulences you might face in your life, you can imagine economic crises, maybe political elections, maybe personal crisis, health, family. But hardly anyone can imagine that you wake up one day and your country doesn't exist anymore. And nobody warned you. There was no referendum, there was no votes, there was no discussions. It just stopped because few people signed the document and it was done.
That was
For
what,
me,
1986?
1991.
1991.
1991. Very recently. You probably
Yes.
remember where you were in 1991. So when
Yep.
people think of this happened long time, no, it just happened. It just recently happened. So 1991, the Soviet Union collapses, and Kazakhstan is so caught off guard by this decision that it took us more than 2 years. 1993 is when we established our own currency. We had no capability inside our country to develop an idea of a national currency. Imagine that. So for 2 years, we had no idea how we're going to pay for things. There was no currency involved. We were bartering. We were doing many different things. We're using currencies of other countries and other things. So that, of course, was the driving question for me. Why did it happen? Why is a country that seems so unshakable and unmovable one day disappears another day? Why is a company like Kodak and Nokia and many others that we know from corporate storytelling, why are they these heroes, this untouchable titans, and the next day they're gone and they're the laughing stock? And how can we find a way to choose our destiny rather than be a victim of somebody else's choice? That's what informed me.
So your work is really all stemmed off of that seminal moment in your life. And how could the world as I know it, the story as I know it, completely unravel and spend a couple of years of redeveloping what their new story would be moving forward? So that led you to where?
That led me to a whole bunch of discoveries. So I was extremely fortunate because I had so many mentors in my life who shaped my life. In 94, I joined a nonprofit organization called Association of Young Leaders, and was a partnership organization with an American California Association of Student Councils, where we were taught basics of leadership, basic of strategic planning, a lot of things on team dynamics. And that got my interest going in the field of organizational behavior, which is a combination of business strategy, and that's how do you develop a company ready to execute, and the people side. So it's intersection of people and business, which is the most interesting intersection. And that's where I did my doctorate.
Were you still in Kazakhstan at that point, or had you moved?
No, I won a scholarship to come here to do 1 year of college at an amazing, tiny private liberal arts school called Hartwick College in upstate New York. Very old school, created in 1700s. And that liberal arts school was the one that says, 1, here's a scholarship, stay and graduate. 2, you're applying to a PhD, we're not taking no for an answer. So my faculty fought for me, and me being my arrogant young self, I was like, I'm going to live in New York City. It's just down the road. I don't want to do any PhD. What are you talking about? I was 22 at the time. So I'm very, very thankful. I'm humbled. I owe a lot to my faculty.
Yeah. And so we find you here today with this new book, the Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook, How to Thrive in Chaos. What was your overall goal for this, or why did you feel like this book was so needed now?
First and foremost, this book is a culmination of many years of work, not just mine. This book is co-created by over 3,000 reinvention practitioners all over the world. Our community is very strong, very loud, and very vibrant. And because of their efforts, not just mine, because I put in a tool or an idea and they actually use it in real business or nonprofit or somewhere else, and they come back and say, hey, adjust it this way, or this is not working, or this is great, keep moving this direction. So the book is really a culmination of quite a few years of work. But how did this happen? After the doctorate, I became a professor of strategy and sustainability, and I grew through the ranks of becoming a Coca-Cola chaired professor, which is a very big honor. I really appreciate the chance that somebody would give me so much support and grants and so on to do the research. But I taught an executive education only. And one of my students, a CEO of a company, sitting in my classroom said, I like what you're saying. You talk a big game. There's only one problem. You never worked in business. So all of the things you say would make much more sense if I knew that you actually practiced. And that was the start of my own company, which we started in 2007. And our specialty is reinvention. So we would help companies most of the time that were in distress. And right after we founded the company, the big crisis happened, the big economic crisis of 2008, 2011. So we had a lot of clients, but also occasionally it's more proactive. Can you help us reinvent proactively? And 2007, we started. 2014, we couldn't accept any new clients. We actually were out of any capacity. And that's when our clients started saying, can you develop a methodology? If you cannot come, can you give us a book? Can you give us a set of tools? Can you give us some training? And this was the birth of Reinvention Academy, where the tools in this book, and you have it in your hands, you know how interactive it is. It's filled with worksheets. It has 9 tools. It has canvases. It has work cases that you do as a group. All of those come from this 5 plus 6 years of developing methodology and developing tools and testing them, because we simply couldn't do any more projects on our own.
So you had to reinvent yourself.
100 of times.
Exactly right. So you couldn't take any more business. You created this. What's the number one thing, if there is a number one thing that you could share with our listeners that a business owner, an entrepreneur might be thinking about when it comes to reinvention?
Number one is forget that reinvention is a project, that it's something that you finish, that you do once and you're done. Reinvention is like taking a shower. If you take a shower on a regular basis, you're healthy and good and clean. If you don't take a shower for a couple of weeks, you begin to stink. So absolutely same in business. If you don't reinvent on a regular basis, you begin to stink. And then you get sick and other things happen. And people don't want to be around you. Same with you. Your clients, your partners don't want to be around you. Your company begins to stink and to get sick and so on. So number one thing that we try to convey with this book, that it used to be in the 20th century when the cycles were long, when you didn't need to reinvent for 40 years or 50 years or 20 years, you could look at reinvention as this one-time event. We do it, we are done, our hands are clean, we can go back to business as usual. That is no longer the environment in which we're in. We see absolutely no evidence that uncertainty will decrease. We see a lot of evidence from every field of study that volatility will only stay the same or go higher. And disruptions such as COVID-19 is just a sign of the time. It will be COVID this time, then it will be economic disruption or technological disruption or fire in your region or any climate change disruption, any kind of disruption. It will keep going and going and going. So unless you build a proactive system that allows you to take a shower on a regular basis, you will not be in business for long.
And I think it's interesting about the idea of reinvention is it does presume a one and done thing. I've been doing it this way. We need to change. We need to pivot. Chaos is beating us up. So we're going to reinvent how we do this. All right, we're done. Reinvention is done. I might suggest it get reframed to expedited evolution.
I
because
like that.
what you're really doing is you are evolving over time, and evolution never stops. But evolution is, the snail's pace of Darwin. But what we're talking about is the compounded rate of Moore's law. So what you're really talking about is not reinvention, but expedited evolution. And if you don't evolve, the survival of the fittest, what happens?
You will be out.
Yes.
Yeah, you will be out. For this idea of expedited evolution, one of the things that we developed that is surprisingly simple, but it saved so many companies. We have this simple tool in the book called the portfolio canvas, Reinvention portfolio canvas. Is this idea that you need to think in a form of portfolio. You don't have one project, you have a portfolio of efforts. And those efforts can range from being rather small, incremental, very narrow in their scope versus radical more breakthrough, more disruptive, and more whole system type of things. And you need all of them, depending on where you are in your cycle. And sometimes you need to go more radical, and sometimes small continuous improvements and more evolutionary type of things definitely are necessary.
All right. So say I am an old, staid business to business practice. I'm a CPA. And I got a dozen CPAs working for me. I crunch numbers, I read tax reports, I stay up on all the trending so that I can take care of my people. I'm a commodity, but I built a pretty good business and I've had it for 20, 25 years. Do I really need to reinvent?
Well, since you touched CPA, you already know that there is a wonderful research, many different studies, including the Oxford University study that predict that about 47% of all American jobs will be obsolete due to automation. And CPA is one of those very highly algorithmic job. And because they're algorithmic, they require step-by-step rule-based type of activity. It's the easiest to automate. And you already see it's happening. You see how many of us are moving towards different type of software that does taxes. At least bookkeeping is fully done. And after the bookkeeping is done, the next thing is more complex stuff, such as the CPA work. So for some professions, such as CPAs, if you run a business in the CPA world, you are particularly at risk, because a small step in the evolution of artificial intelligence, you are the first one to go. Compared to other jobs, compared to other services, you are the first one to go. So number one, you absolutely must. But even if you are not in this field, what is happening is more small level disruptions. Right now, you already shared that early in the podcast, where you say that the world, things are being very available now. Knowledge was not available 50 years ago. Information was not at your fingertips 50 years ago, but also capital, finance. The democratization of finance is incredible in the last 50 years. It used to be that decisions on who gets money and who doesn't get money was in the hands of very small group of players, mainly big banks. And you couldn't get financed for your small nonprofit or your small startup. Right now, Robinhood, direct crowdfunding, all kind of platforms, banks, and on and on and on. You can get money, which means even when you are relatively safe in your region. I live in Ohio. It's not considered to be the most Silicon Valley of the world. So you can be in the Delaware County, which is not a very prosperous county. But even in your county, a local startup can do things fast and more efficiently than you can. So you have to find a way to stay relevant to the current needs, current technology, current legislation, and so on.
With your clients, what is the biggest pushback you get? So they show up and think, okay, we need to, Dr. Nadya, have some reinvention or do something, but fill in that but for me. What do they push back on?
Well, there are quite a few things. So some pushback, the big pushback that we get for years is, again, the assumptions are all stem from long cycles. So in a lot of business competencies and a lot of business tools and theories, think about stuff such as just-in-time management, or the assumptions around debt to equity. How much debt should your company carry? Assumptions around strategy, long-term strategy and strategic planning. All of those assumptions come from long cycles. You can have a lot of debt when things are predictable. You can have just-in-time inventory when inventory is not disrupted by COVID, tornadoes, and everything else. Now you have to rethink those assumptions. And a lot of them push back because they grew up in stable cycles. They grew up in those business schools and in those cases where that was the rule of the game. And it's very hard for them to unravel that and say, yes, it worked for me 20 years ago, but it can just kill me today. So that's first. The second pushback is we have a wonderful studies, and there's a great book called Stall Points. It's now a classic. It's been around for, I won't say 15 years, maybe a little bit more. Stall Points was a research that showed that if you reinvent your company on decline, when you're already seeing declines in sales or net profits or anything else, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, if you reinvent on decline, the chances of you ever going back to your historic performance are only 10%. At that point, the budgets are already tight. The fear is already running the show. The political will is not there to make radical decisions. So if you reinvent on the decline, you're already cooked. That means you need to break your business before somebody else will. You need to forget this idea. If it's not broken, don't fix it. You have to break it now. And that is a huge pushback because people are like, what are you talking about? We're perfect. We're still climbing. Why would you mess with what's working? And that's very hard for them to wrap their heads around.
Who's responsible for that breakage? Does it have to start at the top of the CEO, or is it a chief operating officer? Maybe it's a chief marketing officer that sees something happening in the market that says we need to break this and gets pushed back from the CFO and everybody else. Who historically in the C-suite is responsible for that breakage?
Depends on the industry. So I will tell you historically, and then I will tell you what's happening now. So historically, it depended on the industry. It's generally speaking the people who are responsible on noticing the most disruptive element of your business. I'll give you an example. I work a lot with mining industry, and in mining industry, which has primarily used the same method since the Bronze and Iron Ages, just slightly improved. But generally speaking, it's the same exact steps, just better done. Their technology is crucial. So the chief technology officer has traditionally been the ones that are kicking the new cycle going. In other industries like fast-moving consumer goods, consumer is the king. So marketing R&D is where a lot of those things happen. In some industries, it can be even the HR directors because they're noticing a change in the new incoming wave of employees and they make a connection to the clients. In some industries, it's strategy, operations, or others. So it really depends on the industry. But this worked in the past. The speed of change we're talking about today, which is significantly higher based on our study, and you can see that in the book, the comparison 2018 to 2020 data, it's significant acceleration in just 2 years. That means you can no longer combine these two tasks. You cannot run the existing cycle while building a new. You need new people, new resources, you need allocated resources. And that's why what we see, the growth of chief reinvention officers or chief transformation officers. For example, one of the states here in the US, I think it's North Dakota, already has a chief reinvention officer as a state. So the birth of chief reinvention officers, or they're called sometimes chief transformation officer, chief entrepreneurship officer, some other name, it really doesn't matter. Second, we've seen if the functional design doesn't work for your company, another option is a project or a venture capital fund or some other separate entity, a business unit that has money, people, resources to build a new version. So that's what's happening right now, and that's what I see happening in the future. But I love that question.
Well, in your book, and what I love about your book, it's so colorful and it's easy to read, and there are so many easy things that you can do that actually are going to make it hard for you between your ears to figure out, oh my God, do I got to change again? Because we all know us Homo sapiens do not like change. We love status quo. That is what evolution has taught us. Change is dangerous, but not changing is even more dangerous. In here, you have a quote from one of my all-time favorite authors, Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote Sapiens and Homo Deus, two of my absolute famous books. He says, forget programming. The best skill to teach children is reinvention. And it leads me to then that point you just made, that people are now hiring reinvention and transformation officers. How do you get trained as a reinvention expert?
Oh, I love that question. Imagine me falling off the chair when I read, this was the first sentence in, remember, Wired magazine, not even HR or whatever. It was straight to the industry. Forget programming. Reinvention is what you need to teach your kids. So I was, of course, delighted and touched and so on that we share this conviction, because I do admire Yuval's work very much. We don't personally know each other, but I do admire his work very, very much. Unfortunately, currently, we do not have a lot of places where education and reinvention is happening, because reinvention essentially is a integrative science. It is a science that connects people who think about content, that would be strategy, forecasting, futurist, with people who design new versions of companies and products and process, that would be design thinking, that would be innovation, that would be R&D, that would be everything in the creative space, plus people who execute, that would be organizational development, change management, Scrum, Agile, and many other methodologies that help you execute, but a lean startup, and on and on and on. And all of these camps historically don't like each other. Historically, people who like people don't like money, and people who like numbers don't like people. And all of those different camps have historically been very brutal towards each other. So what are required is this very integrative, generalist point of view, with a lot of skill of facilitation and alignment. We ourselves, of course, are happy to build the Reinvention Academy as one of the places you learn, but we alone cannot do it. That's why our effort, our mission is very simple: 1 billion people with reinvention skills. We do a lot of partnerships. 90% of our content is free, and we invite people to participate in our challenges to teach others for free. We teach you for free, and you teach others for free, because this is, for me, an issue of survival. I truly believe this century, if us, our kids, I have a 17-year-old, if my daughter doesn't know how to reinvent, she will not make it through this century. And if reading and writing was the literacy skills of 20th century, this century reinvention is one of the key literacy skills. So we have to gear up and make it to at least 1 billion people with this literacy in their hands.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you think about the old way of educating, which is still around, is, especially here in America, they were building cogs to plug into corporate America to live out that 30-year career at the same place. And academia has been so slow to change that. They talk about resilience in kids and whatever. Well, stop giving kids participation trophies. That's not going to build resilience. And then get them thinking outside of regular STEM curriculum. I mean, that's really important, but it's personal development. And I would also say, Nadya, I would love to see more storytelling curriculum applied in the
Absolutely.
5th, 6th, 7th grade to get them to understand that they are living a story. And what is their story? And it may not be the story mom and dad want them to live. Their own personal story could be something different. And they even have to reinvent themselves in the eyes of their loved ones, people that mean well, but are steering them down the wrong path. I mean, how many people have you run into that are in their 20s and 30s and 40s, or heaven forbid later, and they were on the wrong journey? They never reinvented themselves in that process to really go to where they should be going to have the impact in the world they want to make.
I'm with you completely. Kazakh culture is a spoken word culture. We never had our own alphabet until 20th century, when we borrowed Russian Cyrillic alphabet and added 9 letters to it. So our alphabet is 42 letters, a very long alphabet. But the thing is, we taught kids through storytelling. Mythology is our method. Telling visual, emotionally charged, rationally sound story is one of the easiest way to package complex information into a tightly well done bit that really works much better than all isolated pieces. So for us, I think about the curriculum of Reinvention Academy, we use stories heavily, and you can see in the book as well, we use stories heavily. We start with stories, we put cases in the middle, we do a lot of interviews to get the story out, and also to allow ourselves to rewrite our story in the future, because unless we claim our story, the story claims us. So actually verbalizing it gives you a right to write the new future. Otherwise, you don't even know whose stories you are living and whose choices are you following.
It's so well put. If we don't claim our stories claim us. Another way of thinking about that, if we don't make things happen in the world that we want to make happen, it's going to happen to us. And chances are it's not what you wanted to happen.
I'm with you. What I always say is that you don't have a choice. Change is here and it will be more often and more disruptive than ever before. The only choice you have, will you be an active and willing and conscious participant in creating the change, or will you be its victim? That's all. You don't have a choice. Change will happen anyway. The only choice is, are you creating your story or are you living somebody else's story?
So well put. Now, the Reinvention Academy. So it was not just enough to scale your business and your impact to help companies do it. It sounds like you are training these reinvention officers out there.
We actually took time to rebuild and reinvent our own business. And I'm trying to actively say no to most consulting projects because I feel that is ineffective. I better grow a whole bunch of executives, consultants, freelancers, and midline managers who have strong reinvention skills. Then I keep running from company to company and always be late and always be catching up with a problem that is already created. So I'm very, very honored to see what kind of graduates we have who is becoming chief reinvention officer in their own businesses, in their own big corporations or small companies. And I'm happy to see that they are taking things to a new level. I'll give you an example. So most of our students, of course, are business owners, executive, or mid-managers. But occasionally we get nonprofits. So we had one amazing consultant. He's a coaching and leadership consultant, but he specializes on churches. He helps churches survive because on average, some thousands of churches in the United States go out of operation because there's no parishioners there, because they don't reinvent and so on. And he wrote me an email and he said, hey, I took this diagnostic. You have this Titanic syndrome diagnostic. I want to rewrite it using church language. Can I do it? And from there, his business exploded. And also the churches are truly changing. So one case he shared, he had a church he's working with that has a decline of parishioners of about 10% a year. They're losing 10% of families a year disappear. And he brought it first to zero. And now the congregation is actually growing because he used the exact same tools, which of course is anywhere far from anything I could have imagined. So definitely never imagined that we will be reinventing churches, but this is where we are.
Expedited evolution.
Expedited evolution.
So the Titanic is that one model. You have what, 4 of them? Is that right?
There are quite a few. The total book, the tools in the book right now is 9 different tools, but Titanic syndrome is one of those tools.
Can you take us through 2 or 3 of the different syndromes and what you mean by syndrome? Is this what a company is experiencing at that time? And so they have to apply a certain tool to overcome that particular syndrome?
Titanic syndrome is one of the types of companies dealing with disruption. You are correct that we so far identify 4. It's a simple tool we call Today Tomorrow Matrix, or our participants call it Toto Matrix because they shortened everything. So Today Tomorrow Matrix, which is, if you just put horizontally and vertically, one is surviving today and another one is thriving tomorrow. You will get 4 quadrants. And one of them, killing yourself today and killing your chances of existing tomorrow, is what we call Titanic syndrome. We called it Titanic syndrome. I called it Titanic syndrome because when I studied companies that didn't survive and compared them to companies that did survive disruption, the actual behavioral characteristics were very similar to what I saw at the Titanic. I had the luxury of being at the lecture of a wonderful professor, Juan Serrano, in Europe. And he used a case of Titanic to talk about what happened and how it compares to leadership, which led me to this big investigative journey. My whole team and myself read Senate hearing, read reports of passing ships, read all kind of other things, and discovered this parallels. And the parallels are eye-opening and shocking because what happened at Titanic was not a one wrong decision. It was an overall corporate disease where company essentially killed itself because of their own tacit or explicit arrogance, because of their inability to let go of past success, thinking that your past success is the way forward. And number three, the inability to notice and adapt to new and emerging realities like an iceberg. So those three markers is what we are noticing in Titanic syndrome. And in the book, we offer you a very simple test that shows you how are you doing with Titanic syndrome. And just a full disclosure, I get sick on a regular basis. My team is the first one to say, this smells like Titanic syndrome. When I'm, on my throne with my crown, I know everything. And they're like, that smells like Titanic syndrome. Are you sure? So it's something that we just need to do on a regular basis, do a test, have a conversation with our team, see the pointers inside the test where we can improve. And that's one of the things that can easily destroy your company.
All right. The final subject I want to cover briefly with you is reinvention and change and chaos. So, of course, we all know COVID. We all know what it's done to business. And now communication. You and I are here on Squadcast recording this. We get to see each other, but we're just recording audio. Of course, we are all now relegated to Zoom for our in-person quote unquote meetings, which I equate to a Turkish prison visit. You are separated by your loved one by this plastic wall that you can pound on. What do you think companies have to pay very close attention to now in this Zoom world? I just got out of a Zoom session, and one gentleman who had retired from sales, and he was in the very high-tech healthcare world, said, he really laments the fact that you can't travel around the world and go mano-a-mano, one-on-one with people. And he says, I don't know if I'm just old-fashioned, but I think that's still the way sales goes. But I don't know if it's ever going to come back given our Zoom generation now. I would love to have your insights on this, because in my communications world, what COVID has really hit is Zoom and these virtual conferences now are the biggest disruption in our business. And where do you see it going? Do you think it's going to come back person, mano-a-mano, or do you think we all need to reinvent how we do business in this virtual world?
I'll give you the answer that I got from my corporate clients. So one of the clients we work with is a massive Indian conglomerate. And they made the decision already. Their travel policy is changing, and most of their business meetings will no longer be face-to-face because they don't see a significant benefit from face-to-face. So they're actually changing the standards on what permits or requires a physical flight and what can be done by Zoom. So this idea that you fly somewhere for one meeting in the morning and you finish a meeting and fly back, that's gone. That is not coming back. There are some things that I guarantee will come back. A lot of our transformative experiences, a lot of things that require more creative and nuanced work, I have no doubt will come back, and we miss it. We crave it. We can feel that we crave it. What is, I think, changing is our technology is changing to allow for more humanity. And also we have to change to allow for more humanity. So I can say that in my story, when I started in executive education, I was the first one that kept shouting from every roof at every meeting that you cannot virtualize exec ed. You cannot, impossible. The executive education CEOs come together, private confidential space, far from their work, not disrupted from daily activities, removed in some location, their mantles and their business cards stripped away from them, all equal, all kind of things. Then I started my first digital course, and it was spaced out over a course of 4 weeks. So one module recorded digitally with a lot of interaction, and then a face-to-face but digital live meeting with Q&A and cases and so on. And something happened. What happened is people were forced to use whatever we were going through in their immediate environment. And compared to what I've ever seen as an impact of my own educational practice in the past, the adaptation, the experimentation rate went up significantly. Second, people started experimenting and getting more feedback. We had one gentleman who had a proposal 1 week, and I actually saved screenshots of the evolution of this main visual that he was summarizing all of the elements of his proposal, and the team brainstorming with him. And I was thinking, okay, in the executive MBA, how would I do that? I cannot demand everyone to develop a proposal, so he would have to do it as a side story during coffee break. What is he supposed to do? To post a poster and say, give me feedback, or what? Approach everyone during coffee break? Not even possible. So what I think is required is for us to become much more, I don't want to say diligent, but much more innovative, much more creative when thinking about digital spaces. We've been able to create a lot of true emotion digitally, but it requires me and my team to be different people, to open up differently, to have room for different things that we would never do before, to do warm-ups, to do breakouts, to have a lot more one-on-one in a Zoom version of things, to create new experiences, to use photos, to use co-writing and co-drawing, using things like Miro boards as a place of a virtual post-its where everyone is doing post-its together, stuff like that. And of course, is it uncomfortable? Oh, yes. It's 100 times more uncomfortable than before. Is it working all the time? No. Tons of times it breaks, and you have to be gracious and humorous and show your participants how to live in this new world. So I think it's somewhere in between. I think some of it will come back. I think some of it is never going back. And I also think the level of humanity and nuanced, advanced use of technology is demanded from us.
So who is the Reinvention Academy ideal for, and who should be reading your new book, The Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook, How to Thrive in Chaos?
3 groups of people have benefited the most right now. Number one is consultants, coaches, and trainers, because all of us have been in the same boat. American consulting industry shrunk by 8% last year, and we are all disoriented. You cannot do keynotes, you cannot do consulting, you cannot communicate they used to be. So for you, this is especially paramount. Number 2, ambitious corporate achievers, people who at different levels of their career understand that this capability is something that can distinguish them, give them a new personal brand, give them a new influence. And we have students who, because of our courses, in the middle of our courses, renegotiated their contracts, got new positions, created positions for themselves, and done a lot of things in the corporation that otherwise they couldn't even see possible. And finally, number 3, business owners. If you don't want to have a consultant, if you want to have this practice in-house, if you believe that this is something that can really help your business become a different dynamic, evolutionary dynamic, really evolutionary expedited evolution. If you want to be the kind of company that is able to proactively grab opportunities in the middle of chaos, take crisis ahead of the game and turn it into opportunity, and you don't want to rely on the external forces, we have quite a lot of business owners who went through academy and created a new version of their business.
And did you say this is free?
Well, most of the education we provide is actually free. For example, we offer every about 2 months a 5-day easy reinvention lab, where for 5 days with few hundred of people, you actually go day by day, worksheet by worksheet. And at the end of the 5 days, you have a new minimal viable product. You leave with a practical implementation plan. And that happens every few months. I will give a link to the listeners. The next one is end of April, and you're welcome to participate for free. You will meet people from every part of the world. approximately those three categories. Of course, we occasionally get an executive or manager from a nonprofit sector. So we had people from Boys and Girls Club, from church sector, from public sector, but most are business. And this is absolutely free. We, of course, have a few advanced paid programs. You're welcome to participate, but I suggest you first wet your feet with free content and then decide if this is for you.
And where can we find it?
Learntoreinvent.com. The 2 is a number. So learn, number 2, reinvent.com. You can also look at my TEDx talks. I've done 4 TEDx talks. 2 of them are directly on reinvention. So you can just Google Nadya TEDx. That's one of the first things. And of course, the book on the same page, learntoreinvent.com/handbook, you can actually download a free 85-page version of the book. The book is about 300 pages, but about a third of it you get for free right now. Learntoreinvent.com/handbook. But we will provide it for you as a link so that you can get it in the show notes or somehow else.
Perfect. Nadya, thank you so much for being here. This has been an absolute delight.
My pleasure. And thank you so much. And I love your work. We need storytelling curriculum. We do need storytelling as an essential tool of daily life. So I so appreciate you championing that forward.
Thank you all for listening to this edition of the Business of Story. If you liked what you heard and you feel like reinvention is afoot for you in your business, and maybe you got a boss who's pushing back on it, or maybe you are pushing back on this, share this show with your friends and family and colleagues and the amazing work Dr. Nadya is doing in the reinvention space. Check out the site. I am definitely going to go there. You know, in just this conversation, Nadya, I have 3 clients right now that are going through turmoil, and I think you just answered my question for them. So I'm going to send them to learntoreinvent.com, and that's a numeral 2. This is just fantastic timing. I have been reading this book called The Science of Storytelling, which is just a marvelous book. And throughout it, they talk about change, chaos. There is no story without changing chaos. And we are all living these stories of change and chaos. And, you know, our inclination quite often is to shudder up in our shell and just kind of hope it blows over. But I think we all see it doesn't blow over. So we need to cast our sails and capture the wind and see if we can't maneuver through it. And it's all about reinvention. So please share this show with anyone you know out there that needs to reinvent. And that's probably about everybody. If I can be of service to you, come on over to the Business of Story, where I will share free tools, techniques, tips, and talent like Nadya to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. I hope you'll be back here next Monday when we will have another story artist right here for you. And until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.
This was beautiful. Thank you so much. Great questions. I really appreciate.